Houston, we have a podcast. You're listening to the Premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. B. Scott here with Adam Spolane, Austin Mendez producing this thing for us behind the scenes. And we are here after the Rockets have dropped now 2 games in a row. They had won 11 games in a row before that, had been the hottest team in the NBA. Jalen Green, possibly the hottest player, among the hottest players in the NBA at the time in the month of March. But they lost their last 2 against the Dallas Mavericks on Sunday night and then on Tuesday night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it's making it a little bit more dicey for them to get into the play-in. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. They have a pivotal matchup against the Golden State Warriors at the Toyota Center coming up on Thursday. Hopefully you guys check this out before then. But before we get to that, we should talk about this streak and then now these last 2 games. I want to give you my big picture thought before I throw it to you, Adam. I feel like regardless of how things end, regardless of how things go from this point on, and we'll talk about the matchup against the Warriors in a second, but regardless of how things go for the rest of the year, at this point, the season has been a resounding success for the Houston Rockets. Like there's no other big picture takeaway that you could have from the season and from the Rockets right now, other than it's been a resounding success from the primary goal of developing your young talent, what you saw from Alperen Sengun before the injury, what you're seeing from Jalen Green. These last 2 games aside, and we'll talk about Jalen later on in the show, but these last 2 games aside, and I think he's even been pretty like okay in some moments when he hasn't been good. Like some of the there's been some good even in the bad. But I think between that, the young players, Jabari Smith Jr. at times, obviously the rookies, Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore when he's been healthy. And then what the veterans have brought to you between Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet. It feels like to me there's no other way to look at it. And then, of course, what we're talking about now, the fact that they're playing meaningful games at the end of the year, there's no other way to look at it than to think that this season has been a resounding success for the Rockets.
No, you're exactly right. And the last thing you said is probably most important. Tomorrow is April 4th. They are going to be playing a really big game on April 4th. That it has been a very long time since they've been able to say that. And that sort of stuff matters because for these guys, they are now getting in the mode of understanding what it takes to win high leverage basketball games and what it takes to, they are going to get the Warriors' best shot tomorrow. And it's important for them to see what it takes to beat a team when you get that team's best shot. And I think obviously the last 2 games for them are disappointing. Winning the 11 in a row was big, but the schedule obviously got a lot harder. They were the beneficiaries of a very easy schedule during that 11-game win streak. Not all of it, but a good portion of it was when the schedule was very easy. A lot of Spurs, a lot of Wizards, a lot of Blazers. They did a good job and they took care of business in those games. But you're kind of seeing where they are a little bit limited, where they still probably have some room to grow. But they're at 38 wins right now. I think they've got a really good shot to get to 42. And if you get to 42, that means that you match your win total from the 2 previous seasons combined. And that's been important. And then I think the other thing, and you mentioned this also, from a team standpoint, you saw improvement. And then from an individual standpoint, you're seeing improvement. And you are seeing that you've got some building blocks on this team, whether it was the older guys with Sengun and with Jalen Green, the younger guys, the 2 rookies with Thompson and Whitmore. You see how they both fit on an NBA roster, and you see how they can both help you and be important players on good teams moving forward. So yeah, this season has been a resounding one. They're not going to get to the play-in in all likelihood. This is going to end after 82 games. But the fact that they are playing games that matter on April 4th, that's all you need to know.
You mentioned them being limited, and they are. There's no way around that. But how much of it do you think is also just them not being whole? Because I look at just sort of the progression, and like if you put all of it together, if you like kind of put the puzzle pieces together, and if they're whole, like if they do have this version of Jalen Green, mixed with, and we can talk about fits and things like that later, but this version of Jalen Green, the previous version of Alperen Sengun, a healthy Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore the way he had been playing, and I know he was kind of struggling a little bit even before the injury, at least shooting from the outside. But if they're whole, they're limited, but like it, to me, that makes this thing a lot more interesting. It has to be like kind of be an even more encouraging thing for the organization to think, hey, we've been able to piece this thing together even without some key pieces throughout the season and even late.
No, and no Tari Eason for basically the entire season. He played however many games, November or December, but they have not been whole really the entire year. Somebody was out, whether it was Amen Thompson earlier in the year and he wasn't playing earlier in the season. Eason now, Sengun now, Van Vliet missed some time towards the middle of the year. So you haven't seen them at really 100%. So I think that you'd like to be able to see that. But the fact that they're at 38 and 37 and they haven't had their full roster together, really, I think that tells you that they're in a really good place, especially in the Western Conference. It's one thing if you're doing this in the East where half the East is bad, but they're doing it in the West where everyone in the Western Conference is competing, and it's probably going to take 45 wins maybe to get into the play-in if you're in the West. The Warriors are right now 41 and 37. They could easily get to 45 wins and be in 10th place. So that tells you just the difference in the two conferences and the fact that the Rockets have a really good chance of finishing over 500 while playing a Western Conference schedule. That's huge. And you kind of wait and see how it looks next year. Once they get some guys healthy, they'll get Eason back. They'll have their full complement of guards. They'll have Sengun back next year. So I just think that it's they're in a really good position. And when I say they're limited, I think you've started to see the loss of Sengun really hurt over the last couple of games, where offensively against the Mavs, they've missed some open shots, sure, but I think last night especially, it seemed like their offense, and they're playing the best defense in the league, I get that, but their offense was kind of coming in spurts where they would have, I think it was Whitmore got hot in the second quarter, and then there was a big lull towards the end of the second quarter. Then they had a bad third quarter, and then all of a sudden Van Vliet got hot in the fourth quarter. They've had too many stretches where they'll go a couple minutes without scoring. And it's really hard to win basketball games when that's happening multiple times a game. And that's because they lose a huge option not having Sengun. So I think that I would like to have seen how this would have looked down the stretch if they would have had Sengun.
Yeah. So since you mentioned it, what did you think of aside from some luck in the schedule? Okay, some good fortune in the schedule, whether it be the teams that they were playing not being good or the good teams that they were playing not being whole, kind of like the Rockets have been, but obviously having an advantage there. What stood out to you the most about the winning streak? Because for me, and we can talk about this a little bit later on with Jalen Green, but for me, I was surprised at how good the offense looked without Sengun early on. Now a lot of that did have to do with Jalen Green, but for me, it shocked me that over that stretch, throughout the month, they were one of the better offensive teams in the game. That obviously had been a struggle of theirs throughout previously throughout the year. What stood out to you most in the 11-game winning streak, aside from the fact that they had some fortune?
Well, I think the pace that they were playing with was big. And this is something, and this started before Sengun got hurt. This started before the winning streak. And this is what they had talked about going into the All-Star break, was that they wanted to play faster. And they had it, I think it was last week, where they played at one of the slowest paces in the league. And part of that was some indecisiveness. Some of that was also Fred VanVleet is not, the quickest guy in the world. But they've really made a focus of pushing the pace and pushing tempo. And I think they also started playing slow because they weren't forcing turnovers at the same rate that they were earlier in the year. And part of that was just not having Tari Eason, who was so good at that. So they were just kind of stuck in the half court. Was not a great half court team offensively. And when you play through a center, it also means that you're not going to necessarily be, play at the fastest pace in the world. But they really started to push that coming out of the break, even with Sengun on the floor, and then obviously with Sengun off the floor, that really took off. And you have seen them really make it a focus to get out in transition. They were getting stops, I think, at a higher rate too. Defensively, they were better. And so you have Amin Thompson on the floor, you have Jalen
Yes.
Green on the floor, they're getting rebounds and just taking off. And that's the advantage of having guards who can rebound, is that it allows you to push the pace right away, because you don't have to, you don't have to get the rebound and then look for the guard. The guard already has the ball, so he can start pushing the ball down. And that's you're starting to see this more and more in the league, where if the center gets the rebound, he'll just take off on his own, because that's a good way to juice your pace a little bit. And so that was an area where they have, I think they are, last time I checked, they were third in pace since the All-Star break. And that's been a big focus. And it's worked for them because they have guys who should be able to play in the open floor.
Just want to point out, to further this point home that you're mentioning about the pace, got to point this out. You mentioned Amin Thompson. Amin Thompson being in the lineup, and Cam Whitmore, I understand he's been, had been hurt for the last month or so, or however long it had been, 6 weeks, however long it had been. But having those two guys play significant minutes helps the pace a lot. And then, of course, Thompson being inserted into the starting lineup, and obviously just playing a lot more. Him and Jalen Green, like you mentioned, having the ball a lot more helped a lot with the pace. I think that's a big, a huge part of it, a huge part of why they were able to play that way. I want to get to Jalen Green here, because he was sensational in the month of March. And in the weeks prior to that, February, like the month of February and the month of March could not be, I don't think, any more stark contrast. I feel like he really made, and we talked about this when Sengun first got hurt, the opportunity that would be for Jalen Green. And he really made the most of the opportunity. And that's probably an understatement. What did you think about Jalen Green? I'll say this first. Well, let me ask you, do you think there was anything more to it than his shot just starting to fall? Because you and I have talked about him making better decisions, him making better reads. And I know he struggled throughout the year. He's been benched at different times during the year. His minutes have been limited at different times throughout the year. We've seen it. But I felt like what has happened is just sort of a culmination. Like, things have come together. Him developing as a basketball player, and then just sort of getting out of this shooter's rut. And then something happened internally, it felt like, with a confidence, or I don't give a rip, or I don't know exactly what it is, but something seemed to click or to turn for him that I don't feel like I can speak to exactly. But is it anything more than just, man, that the jumper started to fall and it wasn't falling earlier in the year?
There is probably some of that. But I also think that he's kind of become the guy again. And I think that he probably missed that. And I'm looking at it now. So I'm doing this since the All-Star break, and I'm doing this on the fly, which is probably not the best way to do this. But basically, the offense has revolved around him. And I think that he's enjoyed that again, because that's what his first two NBA seasons really were like, was that he was the guy. And then all of a sudden he had to defer a little bit to Alperen Sengun. And now he's not having to necessarily do that anymore. So I think that he's probably enjoyed that. I think that he is playing with a level of confidence that maybe he didn't have earlier. And I don't know why. It's been one of those strange things where he's just more confident. And I wish that I could explain that. And actually, you know what? His touches really, they aren't up as much as you would think, but he's just making more of them. So I don't know. It's one of those weird, confounding things where all of a sudden he just looks like a different player, and he looks like a more confident player. And now I think he's obviously operating with a little bit more space. I think that's helped. Juicing the pace, I think, has helped also. I don't know, because it happened on a dime. Like, it really did. And he was a little bit better coming out of the All-Star break. We talked about it. And I think he had a 30-point, one of those games in Phoenix, he had a 30-point game. I was like, okay, great. He did it once. Can he string a bunch of games together? And it turned out, yeah, he can. He did string some games together. But you're seeing him really get after it in transition. Just some of the dunks that he's those have been transition opportunities, and that's taking advantage of just his gifts. And like, he's an incredibly gifted guy in the open court, and he's been able to get out in the open court a little bit more. So I think the shot making has helped. And I just think the fact that they have played really fast, that's kind of just played to what his strengths are as a player.
Yeah, going back to a quote from Rafael Stone, I think this was earlier in the season when he talked to you guys, and you've mentioned this on X, formerly known as Twitter, a couple of times. Like when he said, "Hey, his Jalen Green has a skill set that is not replicated on our roster." Like that was a distinct quote. I didn't feel like that was a throwaway quote because, for one, it is obvious that it is a distinct skill set on the roster, but it's a distinct skill set, I think, across the league. Like he is athletically and physically like a matchup nightmare for most. And I was hitting on this whenever we were having a conversation. It's funny to even think about this, Adam, that we were having a conversation a couple of months ago about whether it would be a good idea to bring him off the bench as a spark plug. And the whole basis of that was that, for me, was because there's almost no guy on a bench, on an NBA bench, that is going to be as talented, nearly as talented as Jalen Green. Like, it would be an outlier to have a guy that good, to me, coming off your bench. And I thought that would do something for his confidence. I thought that would be something that could boost his confidence. Now, I'm glad that Ime Udoka, apparently doesn't listen to this podcast and certainly wouldn't take advice from me. He'd be a fool to do so. But I'm glad that he stuck with Jalen Green in the starting lineup. And apparently that was good enough for his confidence. And we see what the turn has been. But I just go back to the whole idea is that, hey, or everything that you've seen from Jalen Green in this stretch is the whole reason why you draft a guy like that number 2 overall. Like, he is showing you through his play, and I mentioned this from even the past couple of games. Like, Dallas game was disappointing, but they blitzed him. They had a plan for Jalen Green. They knew if we take Jalen Green out of the game, we got a pretty good chance of winning this game. We've got Luka. We got a pretty good chance of winning anyway. But, like, even in, like, some of the bad stuff over the last couple of games, you're still seeing the elite traits. Dude, that play where he attacks Rudy Gobert and appears to, like, just hang in the air for an extra half second and still score the basketball in the Minnesota game. Like, that's the kind of stuff. That's the kind of confident play where you always knew he could do that kind of thing, but he's hunting that. He is seeking out that matchup. He's not shying away from, like, when that three's not falling, he's not shying away from that mid-range game, those pull-up shots. Like, he's just playing with such a level of confidence right now that is noticeably different and more in line with what his actual talent and skill set is.
No, you're right. And I don't know why that has flipped. I don't know why it was going the other way before the All-Star break. And I hope, and I don't know if it's going to happen, and I don't know if he's doing any sort of basketball activities yet at this point. Probably find that out tomorrow. But I'm really curious to see if Sengun is able to come back. How does it look? Just because I want to see if Jalen Green plays with that same level of confidence. If Jalen Green plays with the same level of, I'm the guy, I want the ball. I want to see if he does that. And I want to see if he still feels empowered to play that same way, because obviously he can. And obviously those two can coexist together. But can they both be at their best while playing together? I think that's the question that still needs to be answered.
Well, I'm glad that you posed it, because that's literally the next question that I was going to ask you, man. So let me position it this way, because you just said that that they can clearly coexist. So do you feel like this is more of how they're managed? Like, what's the emphasis from a coaching standpoint? Like, do they emphasize Sengun more, or do they emphasize Jalen Green more? Or can they figure it out? Like, who is this on, basically? Is this on Ime Udoka to figure out how do I do the thing that you were just talking about? How do I maximize these two players who at their best seem to be elite players, or is it up to the elite players themselves to figure out how the yin and yang works? Like, how do you see that playing out?
So I think as a coach, you can scheme it out and you can try and put some sort of a scheme on paper. But at the end of the day, it's about the players and it's about the guys on the floor actually doing it. And I go back to something that Daryl Morey said years ago. I think it was Daryl Morey. I don't know who said it, but whatever. Great players figure it out. And I think if you get in, and those guys have known each other now a long time. They've known each other for 3 years. They played together now for 3 years. They have been on the floor together a lot, especially over the last 2 years. I think that it's on those two to figure it out. Now it's on Udoka and that staff to kind of help guide them, but those are the two guys that are going to be on the floor, and you can't hold their hands when they're on the floor. So those two guys got to figure it out themselves. And again, I think that they can do it. It's just that we've seen them both be effective together. I just want to see, can they both play at an all-star level when they are playing together? That's what we need to see. And I think that part of that will be the offseason. I think that they'll be able to work out together quite a bit this offseason. As far as I know, Sengun doesn't have national team commitments that I'm aware of. I'm sure there will be something, but he's not playing in the Olympics. Jalen Green's not playing in the Olympics. So I think that they should have some time together over the course of the summer. And I think that just they need to try and figure that out. I think that they can. I think that they certainly want to. I think that they want to be great together. It's just that we got to see it. And like I said, I think it's on them. I think the coaches can help, but I think ultimately it's on them.
Yeah, man, over the last few weeks, as Jalen Green has kind of taken off, and I've seen some of the commentary online amongst the fan base of, hey, they got to make a decision. These two guys can't coexist. One of these got to get rid of one of these guys, got to shop one of these guys. I already know that we share this feeling, but just on the record, I rejected that thought immediately. It never even crossed my mind until I started to see all of the chatter out there. I always rejected the idea that these two guys somehow could not coexist. The question has always been about, for me more so, how good are they? Or are they going to really realize their potential? Like, can you rely on them to actually be the guys that you want them to be? But not can they do it together. They get along well. They've played together well at various points. Like, I've never bought into that. Adam, dude, could you imagine the two-man game that those two could run at their maximum output, at their max performance? If you put it all together, if you put all the pieces together, can you imagine? And I've mentioned this as well on the radio. If Alperen Sengun develops an outside shot, like the only reason why they can even talk about, hey, the spacing is messed up and he messes things up because he's, getting the ball in the, either in the paint, the post, in the high post or whatever. It's because Alperen Sengun isn't really much of an outside shooter, still hasn't really developed that part of his game. And I still think that there's plenty of room to grow there. It's year 3. There's still plenty of room to grow there. And I still think that he will. If and when he does, or let's just say that he had already, that part of the conversation I don't even think would exist. So to me, there's a couple of things. First of all, it's ridiculous. They can play together. But second of all, think about the room to grow, like how much better they actually can be together. If Sengun continues to work on and develop his game, if this is if this version of Jalen Green is the version of Jalen Green that you're getting going forward, those two guys absolutely can play together.
Yeah, I saw James Harden and Chris Paul coexist together. Like,
right.
Great players always find a way to figure it out. They always do. And you can never have too many great players on a team. I saw Dwayne Wade and LeBron James coexist and have two of the best seasons that I think that we have ever seen together on a Heat team that was just outstanding. Like, great players can coexist. I do think they need to improve in certain areas where it benefits both. You know what I mean? It's like Jalen Green. If Jalen Green does this, it will make him better next to Alperen Sengun. If Alperen Sengun does that, it will make him better next to Jalen Green. Like, I feel like if Jalen Green can become a more consistent 3-point shooter, it will help, but it will help him play better off of Sengun because Sengun's going to draw double teams. Guess what? He kicks out to Jalen Green. Jalen Green catch and shoot 3. If maybe Sengun starts to play a little bit faster, that will benefit Jalen Green and force teams into quicker decisions. So I think that both have areas to grow, and I think once they do, it will benefit each other and make each other better players. So, but again, these guys are young. They are incredibly young still. So of course it's not going to look great all the time. It's not supposed to be a finished product at this point. Jalen Green just turned 22. Alperen Sengun is still 21. Like there's a lot of room for these guys to grow. They are both thought of very highly within the organization. The Rockets traded 2 picks to get Sengun. They used the second overall pick on Jalen Green. So the idea that it's one or the other, it makes no sense. And I guarantee you, nobody at Toyota Center is thinking that way. I think that they view it as we have 2 young guys. One had a chance to be an all-star this year. The other has the talent to be one, and he's really put it together and was almost player of the month this past month and is getting better as the season goes along. Like, no, we're not choosing between one or the other. We want them both. We want them both. Plus, we got all these other guys around them that we can surround them with. So, no, I think they got a lot of guys, and I think that they have a lot of guys that can absolutely coexist with one another.
I want to ask you about the guys around him in a second. But before I do that, since we're on Jalen Green and making the most of this opportunity, and we've had this discussion before, in the season, something to just, I think, revisit periodically. Where do you feel like we're at contract-wise with these guys? Like, is it a, hey, let's just run this thing back and see how it goes again? Because they can do that. It's not like you got to do anything at this point. But both of them, to be fair, and we picked apart both of, what we think they both can get better at. And, obviously there's been some either consistency issues with one or, whatever the case may be. But does it feel like between the 2 of them that they've both done enough to earn, or either of them has done enough to earn that extension now that they're eligible or that they're going to be eligible here? Or is it sort of a, hey, the best thing for the team is to kind of just get more information? Like, I don't know, which one seems to make more sense at this point?
I mean, they both have earned extensions. It's just a matter of, okay, what's the extension going to be? Now, would you say that both have earned a max extension, the 25% extension? I don't think so. I don't think I would necessarily want to give either that contract. But if I do it now, it's cheaper than if I wait a year. And so that's the other aspect of it that you have to remember, is that the cap will obviously go up this year. It will also go up next year. So if we do it now, a max deal is cheaper than it would be next year. But you also have to decide, well, is there even going to be a max contract out there for one of these guys? And I don't know the answer to that. So I would certainly be interested in talking with both about an extension. I don't know if I would go max for either one, but also you might just want to get it done. And sometimes you overpay a little bit to get something done so that you don't have it holding over the player, or hanging over the player over the course of the season. Like, it's not necessarily easy to go out and play for a contract. So I don't know the answer. I think that you obviously explore it. I think that you have a number in mind that you go to. I don't think that you necessarily stick to that number. I think if you have to go over, you have to go over. But I think that there's a good chance they get something done with at least one of them. I don't know about both, but I think they'll get something done with at least one.
And I'm glad you said that at the end, not knowing about both, because this is the part that intrigues me. And I'm going to throw this at you. What makes the most sense for those guys? Because you raise an interesting point about not knowing whether there's a max extension out there for either of them. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that at this point, but they could certainly solidify that or put a stamp on that. Like, would it make more sense for either or both of them to maybe bet on themselves and maybe even wait for the extension, or is it smarter to just accept the bird in hand?
That's a hard question to answer, because if they both want the max, and the Rockets aren't willing to offer them the max, then it makes sense to play it out, because first of all, then you open yourself up to getting the max from somebody else, or getting at least the 4-year max from somebody else.
Yeah, this is assuming this question is assuming that both of those guys, either or both of those guys, view themselves as a max guy, as an NBA player should, if they're kind of an alpha guy. So this is operating under the understanding that they view themselves as a max player.
And then the max next year becomes a little bit bigger, just because just with the natural progression of the cap. So, but you also probably want to just go ahead and get the money.
Yeah.
And you also, if you go out and get 4 years from the Rockets instead of getting the full 5-year max, then you get back into the market a little bit quicker. And maybe that's something that they care about, because you're thinking about the third contract. And hey, man, these third contracts are getting pretty big, and it's very possible that we are coming very close to having players make $100 million. And you're not going to make $100 million a year on this contract, but you have a chance to on the next contract. So it's there's some tough business decisions that these guys are going to have to make. So it's really kind of up to them. It's what they want. Do they want to make sure that they have that money in hand now, or do you wait and play things out? I do think there will be money for both, regardless of what happens next year. Someone will pay both. Now, it is very possible that the Rockets could offer them, 4 years, 150, and then all of a sudden the 4-year 150 isn't there for them next year, but they'll still be able to get a nice chunk of change.
All right, you mentioned earlier the pieces around them, that they got a lot of guys. I want to ask you about that real quick, because to me, a lot of why the Rockets are, I think a lot of why the Rockets are trendy is because of Alperen Sengun earlier and Jalen Green now. But, Rockets fans know, and you and I know, that they've got some very interesting young pieces. I want to do this I like to talk about, and you probably noticed this trend. Folks who listen to this podcast probably noticed this trend. I kind of like to talk about the young guys and the veterans separately. So let's put the vets to the side and think about the core six, if you will, or any of just the younger players. Who do you think right now is the most valuable non-Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun young player that the Rockets have right now?
Amen Thompson. I think it's pretty simple. I think what he's shown since the break has just been these are skills that very few guys have. The defense, the athleticism, the ability to guard many, many positions, the playmaking. He's much better than I thought he was going to be this year.
Yes.
He really has been. The adaptability to basically be a point guard, and now being, he's basically playing center or playing power forward now for this team, to be able to adapt on the fly like that. It's just been really, really impressive. And obviously he's only going to get better. If he ever learns how to shoot,
goodness,
this is
Adam,
this is an MVP type candidate if he ever learns how to shoot. And this is, Ime Udoka kind of compared him to Ben Simmons, because he coached Ben Simmons back when he was in Philly. And you do see that, you see the skill, but he seems to like playing basketball a little bit more than Ben Simmons. And again, Ben Simmons could not shoot, and Ben Simmons never really learned how to shoot. I'm telling you, if Amen Thompson ever figures that part out, if he figures that part of his game out, there's no ceiling for this guy. There really isn't.
Dude, he is the one player I am confident in saying, I would bet. I don't have a ton of money. I would bet if you promise me health, I would bet any amount of money that before his career is over with, he will be an all NBA defensive player. There's just no doubt about it. He's got some of the skills and traits and physical ability and instincts that I feel like just spell out all defense, all NBA defense. It's just very clear and apparent, and that's the floor. that's the floor that he's going to be an all NBA defensive guy. So, I mean, it's hard to disagree with that. I mean, I would say my favorite to watch is Cam Whitmore because he's just so damn fast. He's just such a lightning bolt, but he doesn't affect the game in all of the many different ways that Amin Thompson does. Like I would agree with what you said about being surprised by how good or him being even better than you thought he could be. We talked about Jalen Green making the most of his opportunity. I don't think I gave enough thought at him. I don't think I gave enough thought to how much of an opportunity this could be for Amin Thompson and how much we could potentially see from him with this opportunity. The defense, the defensive ability is off the charts. I'm actually even kind of afraid of what he could be with a jump shot, and I'm not entirely sure if he really needs to get good at it. He just needs to be respectable at it. Like you don't even have to guard him from the perimeter. You can sag off of him. Like he needs to at least become a respectable jump shooter, but it's not like he even has to get that good at it. Like he's athletic enough to sort of I don't know how much of that we lost. Did we lose my last 5 seconds?
Something up you said we were just talking about the 3-point shooting.
So basically, man, and the audio is probably going to catch all of this. So forgive my internet, but basically, man, the shooting, I'm not sure how great he needs to be at that. If he just becomes a respectable shooter, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. He can do so many other different things between moving without the basketball and just being as athletic as he is. Like he's clearly the most valuable non-Jalen Green, non-Alperen Sengun member on the team right now. Clearly, it should not be overlooked how valuable it was to be able to insert him. We talked about the pace earlier. How valuable it was for the Rockets to be able to insert him into the lineup and give him more minutes with Alperen Sengun being injured.
He's 14% from three. Obviously, that's going to be because teams aren't going, even if he becomes respectable, teams probably aren't going to guard him, at least not right away. But if you can at least make teams pay more than 14% of the time, then that changes what the offense can be. Because I don't think that even if he's a 30% 3-point shooter, if teams are just going to give you that shot, I think the Rockets will be fine with him taking it. It's a lot like Corey Brewer. Corey Brewer was not a good 3-point shooter, but when he was open, they wanted him to shoot it because you got to make teams pay for it. And so I think that's the one thing that is really standing between him and being a great player. But it's certainly there. And to be a guard, grabbing 14, 15, you look at just this, whatever it is, 10-game stretch, 11 rebounds, 8 rebounds, 10 rebounds, 10 rebounds, 9 rebounds, 15 rebounds, 14 rebounds. Like his low during this 10-game stretch is 7 rebounds. And that was because he only played 20 minutes against the Mavs. Like that's how much of an impact that he has just filling up the box score, and having the ability to fill up a box score only increases your value as a player. So I think that he has probably exceeded what they thought he was going to do this year. And he's been able to adapt to having to do different things, and probably this was a guy who had never set a screen before in his life. And now all of a sudden that's kind of become what his role has been. So I just give him a lot of credit for dealing with the injuries early, getting sick early, not playing a lot early, and then just really figuring it out.
Give me a fair Jabari Smith Jr. take. And before you do, let me just give mine. And the reason why I even asked the question is because I feel conflicted. So I feel like he's been solid. I feel like he's been like really good at times, but I also feel like I want more. And it's hard to explain, but like he's good. I want him to be even better. And maybe there's some greed there. Maybe this is just what he is. And also he's obviously young. He has to continue to develop and get better. But it's weird because I don't want to complain about a player who I do feel like has been productive for a young second year guy, but it feels like there's more there, or that there should be more there, and I find myself like wanting more, like unsatisfied, wanting more. Is that fair, or or is it not? Is what Jabari Smith giving you right now roughly what you should be expecting or should be satisfied with?
I mean, he was the third pick in the draft, so the expectations are obviously going to be really high. He's gotten. I think that all you can ask for is just improvement out of guys, and he's gotten better. He's a lot better this year than he was last year, and I
Yes.
hope next year. The hope for them next year is that he's even better next year. So I think that that's really all that you can expect. Numbers are better across the board. I think that you'd probably like to see him be a little bit more consistent defensively, but they've kind of changed what they've asked of him. All of a sudden he's playing a lot more center than he has in the past. He can certainly do it, but no, I don't think that it's like asking too much to ask more from a guy who was picked third overall and has shown flashes. So I think that this has been a positive year for him. I don't think he's going to be an all-star. I don't think that his ceiling is probably not all-star, but he can be the type of guy who's going to impact winning and be a starting player on a winning team. And so I think that that's probably what you're looking at with him.
Do you think it's a fair take that Jalen Green, the focus and emphasis on Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and then even Amin Thompson coming in now, that helps shield some of the scrutiny on Jabari Smith Jr. as a number 3 overall pick? Because I do feel like otherwise, like say the Rockets didn't have this litany of lottery picks, these top 3 picks, top 4 picks, and if he was just the one, and this is what you were getting out, the team would probably look a lot different. Who knows what the team would look like exactly? But I do feel like there would be more scrutiny there if that were the case.
But I don't think that there's really a big reason to like scrutinize him, though, to be honest with you. And he's if you didn't have these other guys, you would probably be getting more shots, and his numbers would probably be a little bit better. So he scored 18 last night. He scored 28 against Dallas. There are some nights when the shot is there, and that's probably what happens when so many of his shots are from the outside. Like there's going to be a little bit of a variance with that. I think that they would probably like him to shoot better than 36% from 3, but it's a whole lot better than the 30.7 that he was at last year. So just continue to improve. Development isn't necessarily linear. I'm sure that there are little things that he would like to improve on over the course of the summer, and you see what you got when he comes back.
Development isn't necessarily linear. This is why I came to you for the rational take, because I'm just be honest with you, man. I like Jabari a lot. I like him a lot. I think part of me is like trying to answer for feeling like he was the best player in that draft. And reconciling with the fact that he was probably drafted. I mean, certainly not, shouldn't have been one of the 1 or 2 picks, right? Like the guys that went ahead of him should have gone ahead of him. And I thought at the time, I was like, oh man, this is a steal. They got the best player in the draft at number 3. And now I'm like, oh, well, I guess now, now that it's played out, that sort of some of that is starting to reveal itself. So development is not linear. Thank you for the rational take, man.
I mean, they had the 3rd pick in that draft, and I think right now he's probably the 3rd best player in that draft.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
I think that Banchero and Holmgren are probably better players, but I look at the guys that were taken after him. There is nobody that I would want of all the guys. There were 58 players taken in that draft. Of the 55 guys that were taken after Jabari Smith, I don't think I'd choose any of them over Jabari Smith. I'm not taking Keegan Murray, Jaden Ivey, Benedict Mathurin, Shaden Sharp, Dyson Daniels, Jeremy Sohan, Johnny Davis, Usman Jang, Jalen Williams, Jalen Duren, O'Shea Obaji, Mark Williams, AJ Griffin, Tari Eason. I wouldn't take Tari Eason over Jabari Smith, Dallin Terry, Jake Laravia, Malik. None of these guys. Maybe Walker Kessler, maybe last year, but Walker Kessler hasn't been very good this year. So I think that if you're the Rockets, you had the 3rd overall pick in that draft, and you're probably getting at worst the 3rd best player in that draft. That's a big win.
All right, man. Let's shift over. I don't want us to go too long, man. We got things to do today, but I want to shift over to this game against the Warriors and why I feel like it still matters. You mentioned earlier in the show that in all likelihood, they're not going to get in the play-in. They're 3 games back. And so, look, this is to me why it still matters. They can win this game and it not matter. Like, they can win this game, still be they would still be 2 games back if they win this game.
They would need to still make up 3 games.
And they would still need to make up 3 games to do it. So what they need would be help, and that would have to be the Warriors having some kind of epic collapse here at the end of the season for them to make it. So they can win this game and it still not matter. But if they lose the game, they certainly don't have a chance. I don't know if they're like mathematically eliminated, but at that point, like, the odds are so far stacked against you if you lose the game. And to me, like, there's a shift here from it, and this is more of a narrative shift, not in like their mentality or approach, but like just in how I discuss them or view them. There's a shift from, hey, the winning streak, the month of March, the 11 game winning streak, all of that. You're going from like emphasize winning to like not losing. And we talk about the urgency at the end of the season or playing meaningful games at the end of the season. That's what makes this game meaningful, is that, hey, maybe winning it doesn't do anything for you, but you damn sure can't lose it. Like, you can't lose this game. This is a gotta have it game. This is like a playoff game for you. Basically, functionally, it's a playoff game for you. And so that's the value in it. That to me is why it still matters, because it's a meaningful game for you. How do you approach a game that you gotta have? How do you approach a game? How badly do you not want to lose? And so that is why I'm very, very much interested to see how they come out and compete against the Warriors in this game. If it's a lot like, and I expect it to be a lot like what we saw at various points throughout the season, but certainly throughout the 11 game winning streak, where it's competitive and, it feels like a game that matters. To me, the fact that losing the game all but eliminates you adds some weight to this game for me.
So if they lose tomorrow, they would have to go 6-0 to make the play-in. Well, so if they lose tomorrow and then win their final 6 games, the Warriors would have to go 1-5 for them to make the play-in. So
which is that's almost mathematically eliminated.
Yeah. So if they win tomorrow, then if they were to go 6-0, the Warriors go 3-3, and then the Rockets get in. So that's kind of just the difference. And again, their chances are very slim. They know their chances are very slim, but it is the first time really that this group and that all these young guys are going to be playing a game with their backs against the wall. And I do want to see how they respond to it. I do want to see if they're able to rise to the moment, because you're trying to figure out who can play at that level when the stakes really start to matter. And so you get an opportunity to see these guys play in a game like that. Jalen Green in Jalen Green's first 2 years in the NBA, they were basically out of it by Thanksgiving. So the fact that he's played his best basketball towards the end of the year when they are in a playoff chase, that has been encouraging. But you do also want to see it against not just a good team in the Warriors, but a team that has won a bunch of championships together and knows what it takes to win games like this. You want to see if they have that in them. And I don't think, listen, if they lose tomorrow, it's whatever. But if they lose a close game, it's really encouraging. If they get blown out, then it's, it does kind of leave a bad taste in your mouth. You just want to see them compete. You want to see them have a chance to win. If they have a chance to win and then Steph rains down a bunch of threes at the end of the game, you tip your cap and you say, you know what, this was a good run. We now know what it takes to try and win at this level, because the idea that they were, I didn't think that they would be in this position when the season started. We went through all the teams in the West that they were going to have to finish in front of in order to be in this race. And the fact that they're in this race is a huge win. They were aided a little bit by, Memphis losing their entire team at the start of the year and then just having guys drop like flies. It's not going to get any easier in the West, that's for sure. San Antonio will be much better next year. They get a full season of Wembanyama. Plus, I imagine that they will try to assemble an NBA team around him. So it's going to be hard. Like this, being in the West is not easy. And you just want to see how these guys respond to big games because next year, that's all they're going to be in. Basically, every game against a Western Conference opponent next year is going to be big. And so do you rise to the occasion or do you play down to the occasion?
Again, bigger picture, no matter what happens Thursday night against the Warriors, this season for the Rockets has been a resounding success. Between the development and the fact that they're playing meaningful games at this point in the season, it has been a resounding success for the Rockets. So bigger picture, there's no doubt about it. The smaller picture, though, this is a game that you got to have. And how they respond, this thing that we're talking about, you and I, how they respond to that, I think reflects on what you have bigger picture. How do you respond to a moment where, hey, even if you lose the game, like you said, hey, you can live with it. So you're not gonna make the play in. You can live with it based off of what you've developed and what you've seen this season. But how you respond in the moment, I think is going to say a lot, or would say a lot, or go a long way for what you have going forward, for how your bigger picture view.
And if anything, it makes the last 6 games matter. And I do think the more games that this team, plays that actually matter, I think the better off that they will be moving forward. And Jabari Smith said this after they lost on Sunday. As he was asked, was Tuesday's game a must win? And he's like, I think they're all a must win at this point. And he's right if they're trying to make the play in. But he also said, like, this is only going to help us. The fact that we are playing in high leverage games down the stretch against another team that is playing in a high leverage game, Dallas on Sunday, they're trying to stay out of the play-in. Minnesota is trying to play for the 1 seed in the West, and now you have the Warriors. Obviously, they're just trying to stay in the play-in at this point. So the fact that they are playing games that matter for them, but they also matter for the teams that they're playing, so you're getting kind of a taste of what playoff basketball is, because obviously this team has had the exact opposite the last couple of years.
Adam Spolane, Brandon Scott, Austin Mendez producing for us, H-Town Hoops Podcast. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends, subscribe to the Sports Radio 610 YouTube page to get the video version of this bad boy. We'll see y'all next week.